I'm Avni Stoka, I'm character designer and comic artist. I draw for books, animated series, and I just created my own comic book. Light has a very special place in my illustrations. I think it's fascinating how light can enhance an image and take the viewer at a specific time and place. Throughout my journey, I always wondered how the artists I love brought light in their pieces. I tried to find answers through books, tutorials, but it was a long and slow process, as the information wasn't all in one place. Today, I want to share with you what I learned over the years so you don't have to go through that. This course is designed for beginners as well as intermediate artists who would like to further deepen their knowledge about light and learn new techniques. I will explain step by step the different principles of light and its different forms, such as direct light, diffuse light, reflection, and so on. I will show you all the brushes and different shading techniques I use, and I will talk about colors as well, how to choose them with meaning. Finally, we will draw an illustration together using 4 different lighting setups. After completing this course, you will understand light better and know how to bring it in your own artwork. These new techniques will take your drawing skills to the next level. All you need to get started is an iPad, an Apple Pencil and Procreate. But don't worry if you don't have an iPad. All the tools and techniques I use can be applied to Photoshop or another similar drawing software. So let's start drawing! So we will start by looking some pictures. I chose some movies still because you know now I really like to be inspired by movies. If you don't know this account, I invite you to check it out. It's Color Palette Cinema on Instagram. It's really nice. There are a bunch of movies still with color palettes and it can be really inspiring if you want to work on a specific atmosphere or simply to do a color and light studies as we are going to do now. Okay, so what we have to look at first? I like to begin by looking at the overall color of the image. If I had to pick just one color, which one would define this image the best? This is the question I ask myself. I call it the atmosphere color, or ambient color. It's the one that will largely determine the overall mood of your image. Here, for example, in this Fight Club scene, we can clearly see that the overall tone is greenish. Even though there are warmer tones contrasting on his face, the overall remains green. In this case, the green is due to the color of the general light of the scene, because the neon lights of the office are influencing every element of the room. It's interesting to analyze this color because it already helps you to give a direction in terms of feeling that will emerge from the scene. Here, for example, there is that heavy atmosphere, and it was clearly wanted to give this impression of discomfort and exhaustion. In this movie frame from Pride and Prejudice, here the dominant color is yellowish, a little bit orangey, and this dominance is due to the color of the sunlight, but also to the bounce that the light creates on the objects inside the room. It's a sunny day, so the light is naturally warm, and this light enters the room and it bounces all over the place, on the red curtains, on the floor, which is perhaps a wood-colored parquet, on the off-white walls. These are elements with already warm color, so it warms up the general atmosphere of the room, and you can see that it gives an intimate and a cozy feeling. The second thing I observe are basic colors or local colors. It's the real color of an object. Colors are not constant. As we have already seen, they can change a lot depending on the context in which they exist. So they are influenced by the light and the surrounding colors. So I simply guess them out of all that influence. If no light and shadow affected the scene, what would be the pure color of each element? Then I analyze the different sources of light and what's their color. And if there are more than one source, I define the main source and then the second source, which have a lower intensity and therefore less influence in the scene. It's also important to make the difference between direct light and diffuse light. let me explain that more clearly. This is Polly! She's gonna help me to explain different things. Just a sphere actually, but I wanted something a little bit more fun to look at. Let's set her in a context, because without context you have no light. I choose a sunny environment because one of the more obvious direct light is when you are right under the sun. The direct light is a light from which light rays are coming in straight line from the source to an object, all in the same direction. The only obstacle here is Polly, so when the direct light hits Polly, it creates a cast shadow with perfectly sharp edges, as you can see. This is called hard shadow. You can see that the contrast between the illuminated areas and the shaded areas is very strong. These are different principles that define direct light. Now, what if Polly was in a diffused light context? Diffused light is a light from which light rays go in different directions. This happened because they encountered obstacles, which deflected them more or less. The more common diffuse light situation is with an overcast day. So Polly is under the clouds. The sun is above the clouds and the light rays are still going downwards, but they meet the clouds that act like a light diffuser. It means that when the light rays go through them, they are distributed in every direction. This light behavior creates shadows with blurred edges that we call soft shadow. You can see the contrast is also way less pronounced, with more subtle differences between light and dark tones. This phenomenon can happen with clouds, but light can also be diffused because other obstacles, like veil, curtains, walls, buildings, etc. So these are different principles for diffuse light. There's another type of shadow I would like to explain. It's the contact shadow, that I also call occlusion shadow, that you can see here just under the Polly's feet. This shadow exists in every context. It's the thin dark line that appears when an object touches another object. This allows to give the feeling that the object is actually standing on something, and that it doesn't float. Let's see that in some pictures. In this case, you can tell that the sunlight is coming from the right, impacting the girls on this side, and it creates a very strong shadow on the clothes and also on the car over here. You can notice that despite the intensity of the direct light, the shadows are not black. It's because we are outside, and it means we have a second light source, which is the sky here. It's much less intense than the sun, but it also has an impact on the scene, because it comes soften the shadows by slightly tinting them blue. In this black swan scene, the main light source is artificial, but it's very intense and direct as well. Other than this rim light on the back to detach the character from the background, there is practically any other light source in the room. You can see that the direct light creates very defined shadows, and unlike the previous image, you can see that the shadows here are way much darker and black. This is because the environment itself is dark. The stage is black, surrounded by dark curtains, which absorb a lot of light. And no other light source or bounce of light really comes to affect the shadows and soften them. In this picture, it's an overcast day, like Polly before, and you can see that there's no hard shadows, no edges in the shadows. The light is going everywhere in a relatively homogeneous way because of the diffusion of the clouds. The only dark areas are where the light really has trouble to reach. It means towards contact shadows, where objects touch each other, or in the folds of clothes. And under the hood, you can see that the shadow gradually diffuses and fades the more it goes away from its contact point. In this context of Marie's story, it's a sunny day. We can assume that because the overall tone of the image is quite warm. It's an interior scene, so the sunlight meets several obstacles before coming inside the room. Maybe it bounces in the ground outside first, before hitting the window, and then going through the curtains maybe. So the light is now completely diffused. You can see here no hard shadows either. The drop shadow of the character exists, but it's really subtle. It's slightly darker here on the wall and really diffused. Note that light is not just diffuse or direct. Sometimes we can observe lights that are a little bit in between. The situations where we have direct light are not as frequent actually. Unless you have an intense light like the sun or spotlight, you will have a more or less diffuse light most of the time. They will cast an obvious shadow, but whose edges remain relatively soft. This can depend on several factors, the obstacles that the light encounters, of course, but also the intensity, the distance, and the size of the light source. You can see here between these two images, notice that on the first one, Charlize holds the flame at a certain distance from her face. We can see how this distance affects the diffusion of the light. The light impact is very light and very soft, which creates relatively soft shadow. In the second image, the guy is holding the flame much closer to his face, and you can see how big the impact is on his face. The shadows under his collar or near to his nose are much sharper and fade slightly the further you go away from the light source. Like here, on his cheek, it becomes really soft. Note also that the top of his hat allows a reflection of the light, which propagates downwards. This leads me to the final point I observe: reflection. Reflection is about looking at the bounces of light. How does it reflect? The reflection is different depending on the material on which the light comes hitting. If it's very sleek, like plastic or glass for example, it will be very reflective. Light and color will be more intense. If it's more like fabric, the light will be more absorbed and therefore will be less affected by light and color. In this scene of Rainy Day in New York, we notice that the main light source is coming from here, so it hits the face on this side, but also the hair, just here. One of the most obvious ways to see reflection is in the eyes. It's this luminous white bones that gives a little bit more life to the eyes. It's very visible and well defined because of the cornea. It's a very smooth and shiny surface, also due to the moisture of the eyes, so it's very reflective. It's a bit like a mirror. This is called the specular reflection. Another and more subtle reflection we can see is the one on the skin, at her nose, her chin, and slightly on her forehead. The skin is not a sleek material like glass, but it's shiny enough to reflect light in a more diffused way. Finally, an even more subtle reflection is the one on the cheek. If you can see here, it's slightly illuminated because the light reflects and bounces off of the hair towards the cheek. It's nice because it gently warms up and unblocks this area of her face. Okay, now I would like to make a recap of all I explained before by analyzing this image. I really like this one because there's a lot of light behavior that we can observe here. So here is how your observing process should be. First, the ambient color. So the overall tone here is kind of brown, beige. Then the basic color, we can see the baby's skin is kind of pink, is kind of blonde. The wood on the worktop is warm reddish brown. The walls are beige under and off-white on the top. The frame of the windows are white, the flower pots are gold and then very reflective, and the frame is like a caramel wood color. Now the light source. There's a direct light coming from outside, obviously the sun, so it's a warm light. It creates a really bright and defined impact on the baby's head and on his hair. also a little bit on the pots and on the worktop. It's subtle because of the point of view, but there's surely a hard shadow here because of the baby blocking the light coming from there. Then the direct light bounces on the sink. It's coming from below and it diffuses on the baby's face, but also slightly on the wall. There is a warm yellowish halo hitting the wall here. In terms of shadows, we can see diffuse shadows on the top of the baby's cheeks and on his forehead, and also a diffuse shadow on the wall created by the faucet. For the reflection, bounces of light is kind of a reflection, but here we also have a specular reflection on the faucet as well as on the bottles and the flower pots, because it's a glossy material. What else? There's a little bit of bounce light here on the window frame, probably coming from the pots, also here under the picture frame, because the bounce of light is coming from below and then bounces again on the edge of the frame and creates this slight illuminated line. And we can also see the skylight, which is a bluish color, coming through the window here on the left, and it's very diffuse because of the window blind. And I think that's it. There are probably still some things to observe, but so you can see a little bit all the steps I'm going through to break down a scene and to study it. Now that we broke down all the steps to observe each aspect of light, and that we have an idea of how it works, we are going to try to translate it by painting it. To do that, I'm going to explain the different blending modes that we are going to use to achieve that. So let's see that. The first brush I use a lot is Ink Bleed, a default brush that you can find in the inking menu. I use it for sketches and for my line work, and a few times for smudging. I also use a customized version of it to have more hard edges. I named it Hard Ink Bleed. A second brush I use a lot is Big Air Brush. It's very soft. It's a default brush on Procreate as well in the airbrushing menu. I use it for large areas of light that need to be diffused and also for halo effects. Another one that I love is Star Noise. It's a Procreate brush that I bought on creativemarket.com from Elisa Moreno, and I really like using this one because it adds some texture in light gradients and color, and I also use it a few times for smudging. And finally, the Maxio Gouache Clean, a Procreate brush by Max Yolishny from the Gouache Max pack. I like to use this one to sketch quickly and make my rough color. I'm going to show you the different techniques I use for shading. So first, color fill. I start by drawing the outline of the shape with Hard Ink Bleed brush. And then I fill this shape by drag and drop the color while keeping the stylus on the image. I play with the threshold so that color fills up as much as possible inside the shape. I make sure to close my shape well. No holes must appear in the line, otherwise the color will spill out and fill the entire canvas. So once my shape is properly closed, I drag and drop the color and fill it. I especially customize this brush to have hard edges because other brushes can have more variations, and it makes appear a small white line near the contour line, and unfortunately you have to go over it manually. Then the lasso tool. I use the lasso to create and define areas of light and shadow. I create a selection with free hand. Then with the brush, here I use a soft brush or star nose. I paint inside my selection. This allows me to have a sharp edge to clearly see the area where the shadow needs to be marked, and then I fade the rest progressively. It's a good tool for sculpting volumes and adding color in defined areas. Now, the smudge tool. It's a little finger you can find here. I use it to blur an edge that I find too sharp. It allows me to smooth some transitions, and it's also a tool that helps to sculpt shapes and volumes. Now we have the mask. It's a very useful tool because it allows you to work in non-destructive mode. The mask is linked to a layer and you can hide some areas by using the eraser on it. They are hidden, which means no pixels are deleted. You can remove or recover color as you wish without altering the original layer. To recover color, you need to use the brush with a white color. It's often used when we want to erase shadows in certain areas to give an impression of light, for example. So you can see here I hide some parts in the shape with the eraser, then unhide them with the brush. We have clipping mask. In the layer menu you can find clipping mask. This tool allows you to paint only by affecting the layer under it, so you don't need to worry about exceeding your shape. And you keep your layer under safe from any brush strokes. Here I deactivate the clipping mask on purpose so you can see what it looks like. It doesn't matter at all if you draw roughly outside the shape. The clipping mask is acting a little bit like a stencil. Then we have Alpha Lock. You can activate by swiping 2 fingers right on the layer. When there's a little checkerboard, it means that it's active. It's a convenient tool when you need to paint inside the shape on the same layer without worrying about exceeding the shape too. The blending modes are going to be a huge part in the lighting and shadowing, so it's really interesting to know more about them. The first one you need to know is Multiply. You can find it here. What it does? Well, the resulting image is darkened, depending on the blend color. It's like a transparent tinted sheet that you put on top of your design. You put a blue color on top of a yellow color, you will get green. It's a key blend mode to create shadows, and it also allows you to influence the overall mood of a scene. The second one is Overlay. It superimposes or multiplies the colors according to the base color. As you can see, it has no effect on the white. The effect works only on colors. I mainly use it to bring light and influence the shade of the lights. Then we have Hard Light. It multiplies or overlays colors depending on the blend color. This effect is useful for adding highlights as long as you use a color with more than 50% gray. Below 50%, it has a darkening effect. I sometimes use it to lighten some areas in the shadow while bringing more intense color. I also use it to play with the effect of reflection on the windows or in the eyes, for example. And the last one I use a lot is Addition. It brightens the base color depending on the blend color and increases the brightness. I mainly use it to create halo light effects. And that's it for the blending modes. There are 4 modes. That means we will use a certain number of layers. I like to distinguish the effects and keep my layers separated because this way I can go back to my layers and change the color as I see fit independently without affecting the rest. It's also really convenient because it gives the opportunity to explore different possibilities. Now I'm quickly going to recap and show you all the techniques by creating a frame to poly. So I create the body shape with hard ink blade brush, and then I'm going to drag and drop the color to fill the shape. I create a new layer that I clip to the body layer to be sure not to draw outside its shape, and then I draw the face elements. Here I alpha lock the body so I can paint with a new color inside the shape. And I'm going to use a soft airbrush so it can have a diffuse effect. On top of everything, I create a new layer set in multiply to create shadows with the star noise brush. You can see that I also clip this mask to the body, so the shadows don't exceed the body shape. On a new layer set in overlay, I create highlights in the eyes and on the head with the ink bleed brush. Then, on a new layer again, set in hard light, I create the reflection on the eyes, still with the ink bleed brush. And finally, on a layer set on top in addition mode, I create a halo with the big soft brush. Note that the most suitable blending modes may change depending on the specifics of your drawing. Depending on the context, an effect will work better than another, so I invite you to play with different modes to realize the effects they have and what may suit your image the best. There is a small remark I would like to make before starting to paint. It's important to know that the style you use will influence the way you are going to graphically translate it. If you tend to have a 2D style, you will treat the shadow and light in a more binary way. It's a question of making choices between what is essential or not for the comprehension. I'm going to show you two artists that I love so much for their mastering of light, and you will see how their style is very different. Starting with Pascal Campion. His paintings are really great. You can see that he tries to keep light as simple and efficient as possible. There is practically no diffuse strokes and no shadow of contact. All the shadows and light are marked by simple and clear lines. Even if the light source is diffuse, and yet this doesn't disturb the understanding of the atmosphere and the emotion given off. On the other hand, if you tend to have a 3D style, you will treat a more varied amount of shadows and shades for a better impression of volumes. We can see it here in the work of Dai Tsutsumi, a Naosan painter too that I love so much. There is a great nuance in the shadows. You have the contact shadows, the diffuse shadows, the light bounces, all these elements which give a much more realistic impression of the volumes in the space. As you can see, there is absolutely no worse or better way. It's literally all about choices and style.